so we'll just go in order.
Just kidding.
Just kidding.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
we'll,
You're still first, right?
No, I'll
Okay.
go last. They saved
Sure.
the best for last.
Yeah, so
okay,
we'll do,
so we'll aim
we'll,
for half an hour.
we'll just go, I was gonna go cost center by cost center, if that makes
Great.
sense.
Yeah.
And there's not a whole lot to talk about in most of them unless you have questions. So beginning with 1330, which is public health, there's really no change there, with the exception that we have to do some instrumentation, updating, recalibrating, and I think that's on a 3 or 4 year cycle. It's a few $100s.
And who is the training and conferences for?
That's the school nurses, so
Okay,
our
all right.
anything else there for anybody?
No.
Check pupil personnel, that's you, that's the ELL line.
So we added an ELL teacher, you remember we did that
Mhm.
last year.
Yeah. You
And
did it
maybe
last year?
Well,
Could it be-
your person is currently hired. I think what happened if you.
We had them on a contract.
Last year they were on contract, but we hired them this
As
year.
correct.
I'm sorry, I'm already in next year.
I'm
So-
still back in last year, what?
Last year I meant this
We
year.
brought in contracted service support to deal with some of the overflow.
But remember, we proposed as part of the current year's budget hiring an ELL teacher.
Correct.
Right, and then you said you could do it contracted services.
No, we
No.
hired a person this year.
Here, let me
No, we didn't
let me
pull it.
just start
Okay.
from the beginning. So
ELL?
as our ELL population grew,
ELL?
we had one teacher and we had like something like 30 kids.
35
We had
kids.
one family in particular from the Middle East
We
that
had
required
refugees
intense
from
support.
Syria that required intensive amounts of support.
Right, so last year, so we brought in, so we had the 1.0 full-time, that was our staff, we brought in some contracted
Contracted
service
persons.
support.
Mhm.
Then last year, we proposed adding an ELL teacher.
Yes.
We eliminated that proposal with the understanding that if we had leftover funds, because we didn't need to hire a Saturday Middle teacher, we would apply those funds to an ELL teacher. So that's what we did
Right.
now. In the budget,
It's
we
budget
are
to
just
budget
showing
is
the
one.
budget-to-budget
Okay,
add.
all right. No, that's fine, it's just, that was my question, was, like, I knew that we had discussed it last year.
Yes.
I knew we had said no last year. I
Yes.
probably didn't remember the fact that
Right.
if there was leftover money, or not leftover, but undesignated salary account, then you could go ahead and hire. So I didn't realize you had gone ahead and hired.
Yes.
Okay, so I just would suggest that in the budget book, maybe put some enrollment or the number of
Yes.
languages, that sort of thing,
You
just a
had
little bit
asked
more
the
detail.
question and
Yeah.
I was in the process of getting
Yeah.
that information.
That's great.
So you're saying under the description of adding the teacher, add that in the budget book?
Yeah, in the comments section,
Yep.
in the comments
And then-
lines.
Okay.
Yeah, it's page 200.
All right.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, just to get a sense of the enrollment and how many languages and how many grade levels, so, I mean, I'm not quarreling with the need at all. It's more like, let's just put a little bit better rationale behind it, so it's.
And I only see the need growing.
Mhm.
I think the need is going to continue to grow.
Yeah, do you know, are we still at 30?
I'm not sure. The problem is it grows over time.
Yeah.
As kids come in, we have to evaluate them. There has
Right.
also been some changes in the law. So it's much easier for kids to now qualify for ELL services. And they've set some pretty ambitious growth targets on the assessment in order to exit that. I would also add that the Syrian refugees come with a host of needs that we're not used to. And some of these kids have had traumatic experiences, they've had many years of no instruction at all. So dealing with their emotional needs, the family needs, the English language and academic
If they have family
needs.
left,
I'm sorry?
if they have family left.
Yes.
Yeah.
Their
It's
experiences pre-Wilton have
Yes.
been extraordinarily traumatic. Food instability, life instability,
Right.
they've seen things that
Yes.
typical Wilton kids have never seen, so they do come with a host of needs far beyond ELL.
So maybe just, again, some more data, not necessarily targeting any particular students, but just the level of where they're
Service
starting
needs, yes.
from. And also maybe, do any kids exit?
Yes, they do.
Okay,
It's
so
a
just some of
fluid
that
amount.
data, yeah.
Then 2142 is evaluation assessment, which is also.
Oh, you want me to do that now?
We're just kind of going in order of the cost center here.
Wake up.
You
So
thought
I
Andrea
guess
was
the way,
gonna do
why don't I
this.
just do my whole thing? Is that okay?
Sure.
Okay.
Is that okay with you?
It
They're
is.
the recipients of your information.
All right, so.
Sure, we'll interrupt anyway.
Okay. So my budget is called instruction improvement, and it's 2210. Right? I want to preface, so it, basically it has to do with the improvement of teaching and learning. But I want to preface this by saying that the responsibility for improving teaching and learning is really diffused among all of the schools. So much of the dollars around improving teaching and learning you will find in the building budgets, and you heard about a lot of that when the buildings were presenting their budgets. What's in my budget are things that it would be more efficient and effective to administer or put the costs in at the district level. And I can give you some examples. There are some digital platforms where it would be very cost ineffective and inefficient and ineffective for each building to hire their, to contract with their own platform. And I'll go through that in a minute. Curriculum days are another area that I have centralized into my budget because it's just more effective and efficient. What ended up happening with curriculum days is that when they were in the buildings, just going to be honest, they weren't very effective at managing them. So what would end up happening is they would plan for a certain number of days, not enough people would sign up, and then those days would be unused, and I didn't have the information to reallocate those to other programs. So what I did was I centralized them into my budget. I managed the whole process. We have a plan, but if teachers don't sign up, I can then reallocate those to other projects. Does that make sense? Okay. So there are basically 5 areas around instructional improvement. It's instructional leadership, curriculum, assessment, professional learning, and then there are some digital platforms that I support as well. So under instructional leadership, you'll see the salaries for the curriculum coordinators, the district instructional leaders, the data and assessment officer, as well as Lori and me. Under curriculum, that includes those summer curriculum days that I just talked about. Under assessment, it's basically testing materials and equipment, scoring services, and some training that's necessary for people who administer tests. Under professional learning, it's professional learning for coordinators and instructional leaders. There are some costs associated with mandated training. So for instance, one thing we're mandated for providing training is sexual abuse prevention, and we contract with an organization known as Darkness to Light. So that's in my budget. Tri-state consortium costs are all within my budget. If we send people out for training through Tri-state, I manage that. You'll also notice there are an awful lot of expenses in my budget for FAPA. And that's because FAPA has a lot of district-wide art shows, music performances, so it just makes more sense for that to be in my budget. There's also some digital platforms that I support. So for instance, we are required to manage teacher evaluation. There are a lot of forms that need to be utilized. We have to analyze that data, report it to the state, so that's managed out of my office, and so the budget for that platform is in my office. We're also required to manage professional learning, so teachers are required to have 18 hours of professional learning per year. We need to be able to create a transcript for each teacher in case they're audited by the state for certification purposes, so that's in my budget as well. We have a data warehouse, and Debbie, you asked me a question about that. So all of our standardized student performance data is housed in a platform called Performance Matters, and that allows for us to aggregate, disaggregate, analyze data at the district level, the building level, all the way down to the individual student level.
Are you happy with that? I mean, how long
Well,
has
it's
that been
new.
going? Oh, okay, I just
It's
wondered.
brand new.
I've never heard of it, so.
We're on our 3rd one in
Yes.
4 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a good program because it interfaces with PowerSchool, which is nice. But we're having a little growing pains. It's complicated. You know, we're able to disaggregate the data, but the data has to be set up a certain way. And so I think in the end, it will be a very good program. It also enables us to create and monitor intervention programs for students who receive remedial reading and math and behavioral interventions, which is a very important thing to do. So those are the areas. Now, in terms of testing, which is I think what you were talking about.
It's just, yeah, 2110, or 21.
So in testing,
Where are we now?
Go a page before, it's
Page
42.
201.
right, that's a testing budget. There was an increase of about $12,000, which was a 9% increase. And that increase was due primarily to the fact that we added more tests to our world language budget. We are now offering students the ability to get a seal of biliteracy, if you remember. It's a little seal on their transcripts and on their diploma saying that they met a certain level of proficiency in world language. We wanted to offer that to our Latin students as well, so I added the Latin tests. We're also offering students the ability to retake tests that they did not pass. So in order to get the seal of biliteracy, you have to achieve a certain level of proficiency in reading, writing, listening, and speaking. If they fail even one of those tests, they don't get the seal of biliteracy. So we are offering them the ability to take those tests over, and that costs money.
Do you recall what percentage of kids last year were missing writing or something?
But I think that
It was a high number.
it is a high number.
That's a program we basically just started last year,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
That's right.
And it's a
You
good
never
program.
hear us speak Spanish.
It is. It's a very good thing we have on the transcript.
Who knew?
We're like, what? Really? Okay.
We also added the PSAT to the fall of junior year. If you recall, we were doing the PSAT twice a year in grades 8, 9, and 10. We did not do it in 11th grade because the kids actually take the Connecticut SAT in the spring. The high school staff came back and said that it would be helpful to have the PSAT data in the fall so that they can help students who might be struggling in certain areas and hopefully improve their performance by the time they take the spring. So those were the two areas that we increased.
Is it national merit based on the spring test then?
No, I think NMSQ is the fall.
Yeah, we weren't offering the PSAT in the
No,
fall? I was sort of confused.
we weren't, but the kids could sign up and take it.
Okay, so they did that.
They
on
did
their own.
that.
On their own,
So
okay.
now we're.
Okay, all right.
Who attends the 3221, the training and such under this budget?
Matthew.
That's for
So
that.
Matthew has some training that's required in order to be the test coordinator. I
Is he
think-
also designated to take care of the new warehouse, performance matters?
Yes,
Okay,
yes, he manages the whole process
okay,
and
alright.
trains all the staff in how to use it.
Okay, so we should be able, if we have that much staff time dedicated, we should be able to draw out the data that we keep asking questions about.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
okay, easier, okay.
In terms of my budget, in my office, there was a decrease of $46,282, which was, $58,000, which is a 27% decrease. And that's because, well, let me go through what we did. We added additional time for the curriculum coordinators over the summer. The curriculum coordinators are 10-month employees that are on a teacher's schedule, but most of their work has to occur over the summer, not most of their work, but a big part of their work has to occur over the summer when the curriculum writing teams are working. I personally think they should be 12-month employees, but we don't have a mechanism for doing that, so I have to offer them additional time.
Obviously the union.
Because they're
So, yeah, we don't
titles,
have
they're
a
teachers.
12-month teacher
Right.
position.
And that might be something we look in, I mean, it's not an issue to pay the additional time,
Right.
but we could contract negotiate, get on the
But that increase was kind of offset because I moved the team stipends to Maria Coleman's budget. Team is a mandated program it's an induction program for new teachers. We have to mentor them. But Maria really administers that program, so it makes sense to put the team stipends in the budget. We had a decrease next year because we will not be having a tri-state visit next year. So in this current year's budget, there is a significant amount of money because we're having a tri-state visit. That will go away. There's also a decrease because I used to have a program in my budget known as IXL. It's to help students practice reading and math skills online. We, as Fran discussed, she really wants that all to be centralized in profession, so that was a good goal to find out. And that's basically my budget.
So the big decrease though is in contract service computer. That's the one I don't understand.
That was the IXL program I was just
Yeah.
discussing.
And it's a shift, not a
Not a
reduction.
decrease.
Right, where did it go back? Where did they find it?
It's
Fran's
under
budget.
2220, 6111, 40.
Okay.
It's part of that bulk number from
Okay.
Learning Commons in the district.
2220,
Okay. Okay.
And the substitutes in service training
So I do support.
went down and then back up again.
I do try to support teachers doing some professional learning that may require pull-out from the classrooms. That's also budgeted in the buildings.
Right,
They
that's
often
right.
run out of money and then come to me and ask for more money, so. I
So the
budget-
so you're budgeting 3,000 less for the coming year?
Yes,
Okay, but
That's
then
good.
back up again for the out years?
yes.
Okay.
Because I'm trying to get a better handle on our subs across the district as a whole in where they're coming in. We actually talked about different ways of doing it because we're tracking individual subs and just tracking more of why the teacher's out and coming at it in a reverse look. So those numbers are there more to protect me from what I'm actually seeing as a bottom line
Right.
than the individual one.
I think the lower the budget, the greater. As you know. I have just one question on summer curriculum days. You talked about centralizing, which is fine, and that makes a lot of sense. And then the reallocation process, I guess what I'm a little worried about is if there is a project that needs to get done and teachers voluntarily sign up, and if there's a mismatch between the need for the project and the teachers signing up, that's the gap I worry about, and
So
is there a way to plan for that, or?
we do the best in terms of planning what we think will be coming up this summer. What ends up happening is that not enough people sign up for some of that.
Yeah.
So I always have people who come up in the spring and say, they come up with a good idea, and I have to say, we didn't budget for that, but hold off, because I can guarantee you that not everybody's gonna sign up, and I can reallocate that. So we've been able to cover all of the projects that we have planned, simply because I have the ability to reallocate. What ended up happening before was that they came up, I didn't know that, for instance, the high school didn't use 25 of the 125 days that they were allocated.
Right, but I guess my question was, say you wanted to work on sixth grade math,
Yes.
and you need 50, I'm just pulling
Sure.
numbers, 50 days, but you don't get 50 days worth of signups. But you need 50 days
To
to
get
make
the work
curriculum
Yes.
work.
Yeah.
So what happens then?
So then that falls on the coordinators to do the work themselves.
All right, I
That's
just wanna make
correct,
sure that,
yes.
you know,
Yeah, or
something.
If a
we some
unit,
of it up in the fall and teachers are back.
right,
You know,
we
that's-
could do that
that's
as well.
the-
Pretty much if a unit doesn't get written during the summer and people didn't sign up, then the coordinators need to write it, and the teachers need to accept the fact that they didn't have the input that they would normally want into the writing of the curriculum.
Would that explain then what happened last year?
Yes.
With, Cedric.
Well, no,
It's like
just
a
got
forced syllable.
That's
Yeah.
exactly what happened.
Yeah.
Still, too soon.
So that we have dealt with, it will not happen again.
No, in fact, you saw an example of the, one of the new units on display at the last board meeting.
Okay.
And how far in advance do you know, like before we go into the summer months, as to where we're all signed up and where the holes are?
So generally, they start signing up in April and May. The problem is even if they sign up, some of them don't show up. So it requires almost constant monitoring.
Lori's very good.
Lori is amazing. We have really tightened it up. We are very good now about making sure that everything gets funded the way it should be. Before, we would end up with many days unused on projects that could have been done, they didn't get done.
And were you withholding payment if the unit came back and it wasn't up to snuff?
So we were having some problems with the quality of the work that people were doing, and now they receive training before they actually put pen to paper, and I'm very clear with them about the criteria that they need to meet in order to get paid. And that actually, I've not had to withhold payment because I think they're very clear that they don't do exactly what they're supposed to do.
So is there, other than the coordinators jumping in, is there full-time, they're 12 months?
Oh, the
They're gonna-
coordinators are 10.
So what's plan C if something's not gonna get done in time for the start of the school year? I mean, is there contracted people that we can hire over the summer, just so that,
Well, if a unit doesn't get written, my expectation is that the coordinators would not really like it.
but then, that's my question, but what if they're already busy, or they don't show up, or whatever?
I could give them additional time, yeah.
Alright. So you haven't, I guess then you haven't faced that scenario?
No, we haven't faced
Okay.
that scenario.
Oh, face it, just deal with it.
Hmm?
So
Yeah.
here's the thing, like, we might write a unit that isn't designed to be delivered until the spring, right? So what we'll do is if for some reason that didn't get done, the coordinators will write an outline of one, and then we'll use program days with the staff to finish it off.
So explain what program is.
So teachers are required to stay on Wednesday for various, some are faculty meetings, some are what we call program days that the coordinators run. So the coordinators can then devote that time on Wednesdays over the course of several months to get some of that done.
But an individual teacher isn't I could be a good teacher, but not necessarily a good curriculum writer.
Yes, so I have been
So-
beating that drum for a long time.
Okay.
It's a drum you have to be careful because some teachers can take offense, frankly, to that implication. I personally think that there are a lot of very good units already written out there. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. What we can do is we can adopt those and then adapt them to the needs of our individual students. The TC units are a good example. They're written by some of the world's greatest experts in curriculum development. We don't need to develop our own. We can just take those units. But again, some of our teachers haven't bought into that thought.
No, and there's a long history
Here,
of
writing our own
teachers being
curriculum.
responsible for writing their own curriculum.
And some areas require that we write our own curriculum. There isn't a lot out there in terms of PE, health, music, family and consumer science, STEM, other than Project Lead the Way.
And when we haven't heard the complaints in the last couple of years, but early on when Chuck and I first started, you heard that fairly loudly that, teachers were experiencing a loss of autonomy. And that was one of the tension points around that was around curriculum writing and do we use, manufactured units from TC or someplace else versus allow our teachers to continue to write. And that's, some of them reacted pretty poorly to the suggestion that we use expertly prepared materials.
I think they're coming to the realization, and I keep trying to tell them this, their expertise is in delivering the curriculum and adapting it to the needs of the students who are in front of them. That's what they're trained to do. There's a whole other group of people who do nothing but develop curriculum. And so we can take what they've developed, and then our work is to take that and make it for the kids who are in front of us.
Yeah, but yet,
It's
then
the
we ask
instructional
those
piece.
same people to sign up for curriculum days. So on the one hand, we're telling them, focus on what you're
Do that.
hired to do, and then on the other hand, we're saying, oh yeah, but can you help us?
But because again, they still believe they have the expertise to write those curriculum. those
Do we have
curricula.
teachers who do have that expertise?
I'm sure some are better than others, yeah.
Generally
I wouldn't
speaking,
generalize. Go ahead.
I'd say generally speaking, the preparation programs for teachers is not around curriculum development.
Right.
That's a whole area that people major in. You have to also understand they're writing curriculum for their grade level. They're not thinking necessarily about what came before and what comes after.
Right.
And that's where people with curriculum expertise look across all the grade levels and how things build.
Would we be better served to change our process of how we do this and not use the teachers at all and just use contracted out?
I think eventually I would like to
Okay.
be able to take units that are of high quality that we develop outside the district. And we've done some of that. For instance, in science, we are basically taking curriculum units that are written by somebody else and using the summer days for the teachers to really unpack them, understand them, and adapt them if they feel
Okay.
it's necessary.
So it's not like you're writing from scratch.
Yeah, and it would be a mistake to make a change wholesale and just kind of adopt a district policy that says we don't really want to correct. It would be a major violation of what they
Gotcha.
Well, there's also the idea of sequencing, and, you know, a teacher can look at an expertly written biology unit on cells or whatever, and want to move the concepts around.
Yes,
Because from his or her experience, it makes more
Yes.
sense to do it in this
exactly.
Chapter 5.
Yes.
And here's the vocabulary that's important, not that vocabulary.
Right.
So it's really revising, editing, and owning it.
So that's that.
So that makes sense for summer curriculum days, is
Right.
here's sort of the material, and then how do you adapt it to your instructional style and what you know about your kids and what you know about where they're going before and after.
That's okay, right?
No, not
Okay.
bad at all. Thank you.
Gretchen, do you have anything?
No.
Okay, okay. Okay, back to Kevin.
So 2320 is my office, and there's really not too much in here. My salary, Lucille's salary, some additional time, some time for training and conferences, as well as travel. I keep some money in those lines, as Chuck was reporting as well. Periodically, we'll get requests for conferences that come out of the blue, and so I like to just hold money to be able to say yes to people when they really make a lot of sense. I think if there's good news on this line, our legal fees are trending in the right direction. So we hit a high several years ago, so we're continuing to come down. What else is worth noting here? Not too much of a change with membership dues. We added Ed Leader 21. I now participate in the Connecticut Center for School Change, so that's inside that line.
Yours is pretty basic.
I love the 8100 comments, like, it's like you just wrote the alphabet.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, those
All
are,
I-
A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
right, and those, so
Oh,
those
okay,
are
that
all of
explains
the
it.
professional organizations.
The big drop in contract services is due to what?
Contracted services went down because, it was probably a shift as opposed to,
33, so let me see what you have. I just wanna see what's left in yours.
They were all over the board 2 years ago, it was 300,000,
yeah,
down to 32, then it
and
was
that's what's,
16.
you know, it's a reflection of just how
I
we
did,
have tried to put
we had the
the right money in
DMC
the right
in there,
places.
we had
That's what it was.
that is not being renewed, that,
Right.
we had that for 2 years.
We did that, we did a follow-up DMC study, and we paid for it over 2 years, so that would be
That's out.
$35,000.
Right,
That was one-time
that's the
money.
big driving factor
Okay.
that put that down.
No DMC, just, why don't you put that in the comment section here, okay, so there's.
Yeah, I find it just a general comment about comments, especially as it relates to training and general supplies, things like that, wherever you could be, wherever you know specifics, it's really helpful to understand.
So just some more detail on those lines.
Yeah.
And specifically supplying contract.
Well, or anything where there's a dramatic change.
Yeah.
Sure.
Sometimes they're explained, most of the
Sometime-
time
yeah,
they're
most of the
explained,
time,
but
yeah.
many times it's like, oh yeah, I have to remember that you said something.
And I just think it would be helpful as we pass this on, you know, to the Board of Finance and then to the general public.
Yeah, I've been feeding the comments to Mary Ann, so
Okay.
we're gonna, the document that goes to the Board of Finance will hopefully capture all of everything that's been raised, so it's cleaner and tighter. Okay, so we'll add that.
Well, I just found it easier for myself too, as I went through. The more that I could refer to a comment, the less questions I had to ask at the table.
Mm-hmm. So just kind of on that point, as we're transitioning to New World, what will the new detail sheets, because it's going to be a completely different format, so we'll have to, is there an opportunity for
We're trying to
notes?
streamline it, and there's actually notes where the principals, whoever's entering their budget in, can actually, they go into the system and enter it in themselves.
Okay,
And then there's a note field, so that we can develop the report whatever way we want, and it'll have the notes under there, and we're trying to, it's, you know, we talked about trying to get zero-based budgeting, so it's not take this and
Yeah.
add. They're doing, like what you're saying, is building on that, and that's what a lot of them have been doing, is saying the things that they actually need, as opposed to just putting in the 30,000, they're
Right.
actually now saying what they need for us. So that'll be more detail in the new system.
is there anything else in that page? The next page, 2321, this was also kind of a new cost center over the last couple of years. So this is the Safe School Climate. We created that position several years ago. So Kim Zemo manages this portion of the budget. The salary is hers. The additional time, I think, is hers. There's an IL stipend also on that. We moved we have two SROs. The town funds one, we fund the other. So we moved the SRO to that line. The training and conferences would be, what is that, ruler?
Right, she's using that for.
Castle conference.
Castle, right, okay. So Webb is the, we all,
She
everyone
has,
belongs to
what she
Webb.
has in there is she has, suicide prevention training.
Right.
She has the castle training, you guys get the social and emotional learning training, web transition program training for one person to go to from Middlebrook. And then some minor miscellaneous.
The ruler trains a big portion of that, 78,000.
Yeah.
Well, that's the contracted services.
That's under contracted
not training and
services.
conferences.
Right, it's split.
And then the ad under contracted services, we had a kids in crisis counselor that was funded through a grant. That grant dissolved, so that was
Right.
that's a $20,000 ad.
Mhm.
Right.
Those remaining funds, though they were located in other places, those are dedicated to ongoing support of our school climate work. In years past, it was the Bill Preble work that we had done. They were located in building budgets, and now, like we've done in other places, we've centralized those here in Kim's Cost Center.
So that's where notes would make
Yeah,
more
like a
sense.
note about that.
If $20,000 is because the Kids in Crisis grant runs out,
Yeah,
and it just helps to understand the $75,000 jump.
Got
And
it.
whatever ruler training is, if it's new.
and then even general
Oh, I know what
supplies
ruler
for
training
that.
is, I'm sorry, but whatever the
Yeah.
amount is, that's
Yeah.
what I mean, I'm sorry.
Okay, you got it.
Yeah, question, if you go back to 2017 and 18, in those two lines, training conferences and contract services, you have $70,000, more than, actually right at $70,000. This year, between the two lines, you have $9,000. In next year's budget, you have $88,000. Are we spending the money this year? Did we suspend all of that for this year, and then we're going back, or is that gonna be a miss in the budget, actual expense versus budget?
No, I'm sorry, Glenn, just
All right, look,
just trying
if
to
you go
track.
to 3221 and 3310,
Yep, so 53
go back to
70.
2017-18, combined you have $70,000, okay?
Right.
If you go to this year,
Yeah.
combined, you have $9,000 versus 70 the year before, and going forward, you have 88,000.
Mhm.
Are we gonna be, is that a big hole for us this year that we didn't budget for properly, or were you
Well,
not?
part of the Kids in Crisis is being paid under a federal grant right now.
Okay,
So that's going to go away and that's going to come into the budget. So
Okay.
it's something that we were able to initiate through a grant, but now we have to fund.
okay.
So that's part of it.
And how much is that as an example?
That's gonna be 20,000.
20,000, okay, so we still have a lot to make, a
Then,
lot to.
right,
We also, I mean, in Kim's line, in this current year,
In the-
we
well-
made some cuts in that budget.
well, with the climate survey,
Mhm.
some of that was at the schools and it was all over the place. So to get a
Okay.
better handle on it, we moved it to the district so we can
Okay.
track it. That's $4,000 each for each school, so that's 16,000.
Okay, I
So
just,
that's moving in.
it's odd,
The
Yeah.
attendance, there's a portion of it, there's the Kids in Crisis has the teen talk counselor and the
Mhm.
attendance portion, so there's two portions there that we pay for that. And if I'm not mistaken, Andrea even helped us a little bit with one of those, with the IDEA grant.
Because I'm
And-
kind that way.
Right, so
You
again,
are kind.
so these are things that we were able to roll out and say, do we wanna pursue them, do they work for us by utilizing a grant, but now that they're successful, we have to fund them.
Yeah, so what, the unevenness in the line isn't as a result necessarily because we didn't cut programs or we're shorting ourselves, but as we were making budgetary decisions, so last year we made some cuts to get to a better number.
Mhm.
It's that, you know, where can we look to cover the cost, and that's what you're seeing there.
because it really is strange, like the 3-year flow, it's
Mhm.
like erratic. Okay,
And then general supplies needs a comment because that's also
Yeah, do you have a note on that, Mary? I don't have
As to what she has
61,
going,
yeah,
what the
61.
specifics are, I can get it for you.
only because it jumps,
Mhm.
100, almost 60%.
I'll let you know.
Okay.
It's a good dig around. I'll bet it's the support for the web crew. That would be my guess. Alright, so we'll come back to that.
Mhm.
2,500, this is Maria's budget, so human resources. The major changes here, we launched a new background investigation program called BIB, so we're using that to, as a supplemental screen for all of our employees, but also for all of our volunteers. And that proved out to be, particularly the volunteers, more costly than we'd originally anticipated.
is that the one, is that in technology?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so that's why you see the differential there.
Yes, okay. That's the background check?
Yeah, it's the BIB background check, and it was something we've been looking at for a couple of years. New Canaan uses it, and, you know, as we were just trying to tighten up our own procedures, we elected to go with it. And it's one of these, you know, they search every public criminal database on the face of the earth. So we get pretty good information and we get it back routinely. The question that we need to decide going forward is whether or not we pass the cost through to the parents. And it's about $21 a person. We get a discount because we do volume. So if we can set up a system where we can pass the discount through, and then the other question is the timing. Do we do it annually or do we screen volunteers every 2 years or some other interval? And if we choose that, then how do we manage it so we know that we can accurately keep track of how often people are screened?
Pass the discount on to whom?
Parents, if we pass the
Parents.
cost off, the unit
Oh,
price is
the
$21.
volunteer. Okay, gotcha, all right.
But we pay a little bit less because we do, you know, more than 100 or something.
So these are volunteers though, right?
These are volunteers. Yes, we're not passing the cost to employees.
So
Well,
it's
I'm just
not-
wondering why
Yes.
we're charging volunteers sounds a little strange.
I agree.
I have to pay
Yeah,
to be a
because
volunteer.
it's costing us an extra $22,000 for the privilege of working in our schools.
But when
I
a
know, but at the
visitor-
same time, if you're like chaperoning a field trip,
Yeah.
that, I mean, you're like, oh, I'll pay $20 to
pay
go on a
$100.
chaperone it, yeah. I'm just
Right.
saying that's, you know, cause it's any volunteer work, it's not just.
It does, yes. I appreciate that it sounds counterintuitive. So it's a new cost.
And what about just visitors who, the front desk, when they have to give over their driver's license or
No,
whatever, what's
that's
happening
it.
with
So,
that?
you know, the program we have there scans their licenses
Mhm.
and it checks that information against the DCF registry and
The sex offender database.
yeah, that's the
So
same thing,
it
right?
all- it's all done very
Mhm.
quickly.
Known terrorists.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I don't,
The
the
most
system we
obvious
have
ones.
doesn't do databases beyond that, you know, it,
But it's a real quick, like,
It
like
is
a-
quick.
Yeah, it
like
scans
a
for
They
hours.
scan the
thing,
license
then-
and it goes
Right.
within a few minutes, I mean, not even a minute, I think it
Yeah.
goes.
right.
So that's not this, this is even
No,
more.
this
No.
is that on steroids.
Okay,
Right, that's
It's not
completely separate,
immediate.
that's completely separate.
right.
Yeah, I think the big turnaround, I think is 48 hours, it's still, you know, it's not like waiting for fingerprints from the state police.
So you didn't have to get one for working in the school store?
Well, no, because I have my,
Your badge.
Board of Ed badge, I have my employee badge.
No, she doesn't have to get a,
All volunteers should be
yeah, you
screened.
should have been,
Mhm.
done the bit.
Yeah. You probably
How would
fell-
I
you
know if I
probably
have
fell
done
in the
that or
loophole.
not?
You
Would they
would've-
take blood from me or something, or what is
You
it?
can fill out a.
They would make you
Yeah.
fill out,
Or
it's,
peanut cup
you
or
would fill
something?
out, they'd ask you for basically all
Did
your
we not do
personal
that when we got
information.
our badges?
No, it has to do with being on the board of ed, it has to be.
No, but when we got these security badges, we
It
didn't do
doesn't
at that
link,
time.
it doesn't link to it, it's a completely
Was I
different
asked to do that?
process.
I don't know, that's what I'm asking you.
So this has to do with the visitor management
Right,
program,
okay.
and you can come in and we can take your picture and scan your name in, give you this. It has
Right.
nothing to do
Okay.
with what HR is
As
doing.
a school store volunteer,
No, I don't do
you
that
should have been
anymore.
subjected to,
Oh,
well, we
you
just
don't have
started
this-
this year.
Oh, that's why.
You're not doing it.
Well,
No,
that makes
because
me
now
feel
they have
good.
students
Okay.
who want to use the store.
Okay, that's
Oh.
why.
When did you get that? Do you have one of those, Deb?
No,
don't
this is cause I
volunteer.
volunteer with the kids.
Oh,
I don't
okay.
volunteer.
Yeah.
Isn't it just being on board of ed?
Is that
Oh,
your
okay.
big card?
It is.
Yes. Mhm.
I
So-
didn't even got a
Verified.
card.
Yeah, you get, it's
Okay.
very exciting.
Okay.
I have a card.
Well,
I
look
won't
at
go
you.
into- I won't go into why I don't.
So before we go forward, can I
Alright.
answer your question
Sure
about the
you can.
supplies? Okay, because
There you go.
outside of
It's
some
the card
general
plus one.
supplies that she has in here with a small amount, the bigger items are how to talk parenting workbooks, restorative practice books, the socially emotional learning materials for staff and students, suicide prevention training guidebooks, that's what's going into that supply line.
And that's all, some of those things are all new this year,
Right, they're supporting those newer programs that we're putting forward.
and that's something that's gonna have to be purchased each year going forward.
If they're consumables,
yes.
then I would imagine yes.
Considering that it's a workbook, I would say
Yeah.
yes. Some of the restorative practice books, I'd have to see what they really are, if it's something that can be used.
So 2510, that's the finance office. Do you guys wanna walk us through that since that's your
Yep.
budget?
Yep, so salaries are partially for Ann's salary, the rest is for payroll, 2 people in payroll, a general accountant, myself, and part of the front office receptionist, which we share with transportation. Classified additional time is due just for what it says for when they're working over. Payroll goes over based on holidays and calendars of when the pay is actually due. That happens frequently. Training and conference is minimal. Again, contracted services.
Well, training and conferences is minimal, but it's a 200% increase from the previous year, and there's no note on that, so.
What we're looking at is, we used to have one of us belong to like Hasbro and go. We each now hold memberships in there and try to go to different conferences, and we also try to send payroll to at least one of theirs a year.
So, again, if there could be a note,
Yep, we'll add it.
just
Yeah.
explaining.
I'm starting more to get cross-training and coverage on
Okay.
multiple,
Yeah, I'm sure it's all good.
what ex- yeah.
Positive, it's all
Yeah.
good.
So, go back to here. 4,000 breakdown. We do hold the print copier contract in our line, which I do not like, the contracted service agreement.
I was gonna ask, why is that in
And
there?
that's, that contract in itself is about $233,000 a year. We still have a couple more years to be locked into that before we can move on to something more efficient.
And that covers all the schools, obviously.
It
It's
does,
the
it
senior
covers
citizens.
everybody.
Now, Eric has been working on a print management plan, and so we're beta testing over at, I think, Middlebrook now. So when teachers and other staff members go to print something, they're gonna get a little window that says, it costs, 10 cents to print black and white, or $1.25 to print color.
Do they have their, does each teacher have their own code?
Not
So they can
yet.
track who's printing?
No.
Not yet, but that's what we're looking
Yeah,
into.
and just trying to
do.
consolidate and
That's what I used to say,
really
all
raise
that
awareness.
stuff.
Because the increase there is for the overages that we get that fall outside of the contract
Yeah.
that haven't been
Do
properly.
you know how many copies?
Like
Just
different
grossing out,
customers
or do we,
and
are,
further.
I mean, I remember, at
It's
least
like
in
we're
Ridgefield, it
only
was,
above $1 million. It's an
It's
extreme
We are,
It's
margin.
we,
really
it
high
is.
number.
It is.
Yeah, so I think, that's,
Well, I thought technology was gonna save all these trees.
well, you would,
Not
I
at
think
my
we're gonna
desk.
get there,
I'll
not at
be
my
out
desk
one of the
either.
worst offenders.
Yeah, no,
so.
I would own myself as that also. But to that point, this is something where Eric has some particular
Yeah.
expertise, he's
Good.
worked in Bridgeport
Well,
and
that's-
Weston, he's
yeah.
set up copy centers and things like that, so we do have some good strategies for really attacking that number. This unfortunate part is we're locked into a long-term contract, and we just have to live through it.
Yeah.
So
Two more-
once
two
that
more-
expires.
this year
I
and
think
next
we
year?
have 2 more years before we
Yeah.
see a change.
Yeah, this year and next year, right?
Right.
Is it a calendar contract or a fiscal contract?
I would have to double check
Okay,
that for
well,
you.
all right, so,
I know it's a 5-year
yeah,
contract.
okay. All right, so it's not too,
but
okay.
why is it in your budget? I guess. You'd wanna centralize it.
You
Well, I understand
You
centralizing
want the,
it,
you want the
but-
honest
You want
answer,
it
because that's
versus
where
like
it's
it.
always
Okay,
been.
okay.
Should it be there? No.
What makes
It
it
should
look like
move
there's
to
like a-
technology, it should move under where they're holding all the other
I think-
ones.
Okay.
I try not to shift too many things at one time
Yeah,
during the
that
year,
makes sense.
because I
Yeah.
don't want it
Yeah.
to seem that we're trying to move things.
Yeah,
It's Marianne's copy usage, that's
Yeah.
why.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's
You just
right.
add the word district, so
Yeah.
it's not like, here, yeah.
yeah.
It's all those budget books.
That's right.
It's just put it in special ed, everything.
Yeah, that's right. We're trying to figure out a
Special ed
way.
So what else do we have
Right.
there? So we do have, we still have a decent amount of money that supports our payroll and our general accounting.
When is payroll going to shift,
Payroll is going to shift.
and will that economize, will we see an economy
Yeah,
here?
because you won't have Ceridian anymore, which is the third-party vendor right now.
Right,
It'll all be under the same,
with the town, everybody's gonna,
yeah.
and so I would imagine there'll be some savings.
There
hopefully.
will be going, well, right now, the plan
Say
is,
a year out.
well, July 1st for the financials and January 1st of 2020 for the payroll to keep it clean from a W-2
Yeah,
perspective.
right,
It's just a
okay.
better
Yeah.
process to go through. And then you'll have some conversion costs and things like that
Yeah.
as we go through it and just get everything set up the way it should from the very beginning.
Yeah,
The equipment rental is pretty much what it is. It's the postage meters for the district. So we oversee that. The general supplies, the bulk of the general supplies is copy paper. And even though we go through the bid and we try to get the most reasonable prices, we're ordering for central office. So that's the bulk of it. And that's pretty much finance. I believe.
okay.
2,700 is transportation. I mean, there's, we haven't locked it, right? And we have not locked
Okay.
in on diesel yet.
No, she actually she got back to me and it is actually low right now, so we have been getting a good rate. And her and Chris Burney are gonna touch base on trying to lock it in now.
Cause I think, again, we don't have much control, but I just noticed it's increased about 45% over the last 3-4
For
years.
diesel.
Oh, it's definitely
Diesel.
above last
Yeah.
year's
It's
price.
a $60,000
$60,000.
increase
Mhm.
that we
Right.
weren't
Yeah, and over the last 4
expecting.
years, it's just gone
Yes.
We're also putting in a different system also two different times. There's the diesel for the buses, And then there's the one that we use facilities in the truck, so we're putting in a different system that we're hoping that the cost of that will bring it down for the pumps.
And Glenn, I did speak with Brian Lutzy over in New
Yeah,
Canaan about
yeah,
their
we understand the
transportation.
reason.
So he said they maintain a fleet of 21 vans,
Yeah.
and they send them all over God's creation. We place 2 a year, and he maintains that it's less expensive than contracting out. He didn't provide any numbers, so
Yeah, I mean, it
if I can get a
really
hold of
is,
him, we'll
yeah.
try to do some kind of analysis.
Somehow we need to dig into that and find
Mhm.
out, because if it is, then we something, maybe something, because, yeah, our towns geographically, the area-wise about the same size, they have more elementary schools, they have
Right.
more locations than we have. But 21 vans they have in their fleet,
Yeah,
in
I
addition
just-
to the buses.
Well, right now, the STA contract that we're locked into is through June 30th, 2022.
Is
So
it-
we have
So we still have
2 years.
some time.
But that's in-town transportation, that's not
Yes.
out-of-town
Yeah.
I mean, they use their fleet for
For
in-town, out-of-town.
Really? Wow.
The other piece that I just learned about, Ed Advance is the RESC that operates up in the northwestern part of the state, and they built a program for the western districts. It's a ride share software service, so a district can plug in and see what other districts have transportation running to a particular school. So I have a call in to see if they can replicate something like that for us, or if CES can build something comparable.
It'd be interesting when they get there, I don't know if, how detailed their budget is, I'm sure you can, but we should be able, someone could go in and look at that line.
Yeah, if they have a transportation page.
And see
I will
what it.
say, for some of our out-of-district transportation, we do contact other neighboring districts
Yeah,
to see if they have kids going to the same
Right,
school and
yeah.
are passing
Yeah.
through on Route 7.
yeah.
Can we share those? And
yeah.
we do save, it's not a lot of money, but we do consolidate whenever we
Yeah.
can.
But they have 21 vans parked behind the high school
Mhm.
at night, and they're just like, wait,
Some of them.
When we start
same number
looking
of
at,
students.
when we start looking at new bus contracts, is there any way of regionalizing that, the bid process and?
We could certainly talk about it, as I've looked at busing, we locked in STA a year or 2 years ago,
Mhm.
and, it's where, credit to Mary Channing, I mean, we've got brand new buses.
We've got the
you know,
best
the
contracts
latest and
around,
greatest.
and what
We've
we
got-
can figure out.
Yeah, we just
Yeah.
had the most competitive, so we looked at other bids, I don't know
Yeah.
who exactly bid on that, I don't know if you were involved at that point.
No.
But,
Mary did a great job. She
I
really
think,
did.
sorry to go,
She's-
so the answer is yes, of course, but we were very, very happy with STA.
Yeah, but again, I'm just thinking 169 districts
Yeah.
bidding, each bidding for it, so is there power in
Right.
5 districts getting
Mhm.
together and saying you get them all?
Yeah, I think it's a great question.
It was 3 years ago.
Yeah,
they
how
got
many of them
21
can get all lined up at the same time, right? How many of them can get where contracts are all coming due at the same time?
Yeah, well, that's.
Yeah,
well, that's-
when you get to
Extensions and-
magnitude,
Yeah.
sometimes it's worth it to
Working.
break a contract if you
Sure.
can pay off in the end. And then the last piece here was the employee benefits. That's the budget saver.
A couple of the reasons, well, the OPEB and pension, between that was a drop of 270,000. And that's the ARC that the employer side has to pay towards those costs. And the driving force is that the funds have been doing really well, and both the trusts have been doing really well. And we also, we have a funding policy that if you're 80% funded, you put in an extra 20% above the ARC. So we're at now 98% funded on our pension, and we will be overfunded in our OPEB. So hopefully the next actuarial report that we do for the OPEB, we're hoping we don't have any contribution whatsoever. So, the question has come up in case someone asks you too is, well, what if the market tanks in 2 months and you take a hit? What they do is they do a smoothing over 5 years. So they take both your gains and your losses over the different years and smooth that over 5 years, so you don't, hopefully the market's not that crazy for that length of time, that you can keep that consistency, that your funding levels stay the same, so you don't keep taking those dips and then the highs and lows from a budgeting perspective. So that's why we're confident right now that in their numbers that they dropped first, that we're okay.
All right, so they dropped it, but my question is moving forward, so
could we face $1 million increase next year, or would that be smoothed
No,
over?
that would be, so if it was a loss, and it's all in timing, again, like you said, if it dropped at the end of June, the value is based on July first of every year. So if July first it dropped $1 million, they would take that $1 million and smooth it over 5 years, which they would have had other savings, so they would smooth the loss over, so you wouldn't feel it. Am I explaining it the right way? So you would just take a portion of that loss.
Oh, okay, is that what happened this year then? I mean, we have a dramatic drop, so I'm just looking, it could be,
Oh, well, there's
So
two
if-
things happening right now. We
one is
have,
the OPEB,
there's the volume,
or the
so,
pension, yes.
let me think, the OPEB itself, it went from 2 years ago, it was approximately $5 million. It's at 8.5 already, $9 million.
So it's fun, that's what's in the fund.
That's what's in the fund from the value of
Yeah,
the
no,
fund,
I
right, oh, the value of the funds. And then it's also how much are our claims coming in and where we think our claims are, because we have to pull that in on the present value of those claims coming in. So when they do all their calculations and then they change the mortality tables, which was actually in our favor.
Yeah, I
So-
know I had to vote on that.
Oh, that's
It's
right.
the weirdest. Yeah, those are people dying
People's-
sooner.
Very exciting topic. So,
I didn't know you could vote on those things.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And is
Yeah.
that binding?
that's the
It's the
table.
mortality you just had to vote to approve. It was very strange.
Yep. So with the change of that, it changed our liability as well of what they're saying down the road our
Right,
liability
so
is
that's
gonna
the
be.
OPEB piece, but going back to the medical insurance.
Oh, medical,
piece.
sorry.
Yeah.
On the medical side, that's a different thing. So on the medical, we've, our regular medical we pay, and then we have what's called a stop loss. So when claims hit a certain point, we pay, it's up to $250,000, and above that, we pay for that policy to pick up the difference of that stop loss. So when they're coming up with our, what we call the allocation rates, and the timing is what actually hurts us, because they look at a rolling 12 months. And typically for us, on both sides, town and Board of Ed side, we have been unfortunately hitting that stop loss around December, January. So what happens is when they're giving the rates for their allocation rates right now, when Anthem's looking at it, they're looking at 12 months, which is picking up those stop losses from December and January of last year, plus coming up to ours, so it's actually shifted up our allocation rates because those claims are in there. Then as the time goes on, those higher claims have dropped off because they're going away. So then by the time June comes around and we have to have the true allocation rates for putting the plan in place for employees, we've budgeted here, and this is where it's coming in at. So we have that differential that has happened. So we built up a reserve which is allowing us to ease that in over the next couple of years. So what is also happening in that, with Anthem, they use those allocation, stop loss claims. They use those claims to do our allocation rates, and they really shouldn't, because we're protected for those. So they shouldn't be saying that we need to protect ourselves again on our regular claims when we already pay for the second policy on the stop loss. So they're somewhat overinflating our rates, so we're probably gonna go look out for a new insurance company at some point, just to get what other type of allocations. So right now is all the timing of these rates coming in. So our current rates are for this year, for 19, are really good. So we're not going to be putting in as much as we budgeted, because the rates dropped when it went into place last year and has continued.
But they could come back up.
They can come back up.
But we
They're
have a healthy
subject to
reserve.
the.
But we have, what I'm doing is, that's what it is, we have a reserve because of, let me step back another. So last year, when we were doing the budgeting, Anthem gave us 14 and 8%, 14 being PPO, 8 being the HSA plans. That was skyrocketing for us, when in reality that isn't what ended up happening when the claims came in. So that built a reserve for us by them giving that. It happened on both sides. That built a reserve. So we're easing that reserve in.
With Anthem,
Yeah, that built up our reserve.
because we,
The town and the Board of Ed reserve was built, what we put into the plan. So we have, I'm probably getting too much into the weeds here. We have a separate fund that we manage that to make sure that there's no hit to the general fund. So your budget, when you set it, we should never take a hit in that general fund, because we have a separate fund that if for some reason we had a loss, the fund takes the loss or the gain. Am I getting to?
no, okay, that's maybe during the year, but I'm just saying, as we budget moving forward, could we be faced with a increase in the medical insurance
Oh, we
cost that
could.
was
We're
just as
phasing.
dramatic as the decrease we saw
But
this
it
year.
would be phased.
We're phasing, what we're doing is, we're basically hedging that those allocation rates aren't going to go up to the level they are because we're watching the 12 months ourselves. And we have reserve to bring that down. So if you can see, we're phasing it back in, because they're, in essence, they're over budgeting for us right now. So we're phasing that in. If it came back in higher, we still have a reserve that we have built to protect us against it.
Okay, all right, that's
And then
probably the
with the
part I
plan
don't
of-
understand, but it's okay.
Okay, and then the plan is to actually go
Right.
look out for a new company to see what competitive rates, because it'll be about 3-4 years at that stage, and we need to re-look at it.
I think the question simply is, we're looking at saving $800,000 this year. Is there a risk that next year, the year after, we'll be hit with an $800,000 hit?
Yeah, the answer is yes, but it wouldn't show up this
It
way.
wouldn't show up
It
this
would-
way.
Wouldn't show up.
Because
It would be
They said it would
smooth,
be
same
fair.
thing would be smoothing.
So it would
We
not
really
be a
have to
one-time $800,000 bogey
Right.
next year.
Right, it's a smoothing.
Okay. No, it's such a huge number, that
Yeah.
predictability
Oh,
and
yeah.
being able, so if you're confident that
Yeah.
those
I am,
out years
actually.
are
I am.
fairly reasonable barring some astronomical happening.
And
That-
without giving too much history, we
Yeah.
had on both sides some astronomical claims,
Yeah,
unfortunately,
yeah,
and it didn't touch us.
yeah. Okay,
From the,
all
it
right.
touched us from an allocation rate perspective, but it didn't hit per se to say, oh, we suddenly had $1 million loss, we gotta pick up in our budget.
Yeah.
Because
Right.
we're protected against it.
Right, right. It's okay. I mean, over the next couple of years, you're just showing lower than our current year, which
Yeah.
is great.
Yes.
But I just wondered if that's accurate or subject to, some hidden clause. But it sounds like you have looked at the projections and the reserves and the
Yeah, it's the
rates
look back,
and
you just
the
keep looking at the 12 months
stop
prior.
losses and double insurance policy.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Insurance 101.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No,
But it's
but
such a
the more
huge-
information
it's such a,
it
well,
helps
such a
you,
huge
hopefully.
number
Yeah.
that the more we can try to understand it,
Yeah.
the better.
Yeah.
Before we get off, one quick question. Tuition reimbursement is in this category.
Tuition reimbursement for.
And
It's for staff.
percent
Oh,
for,
It's for staff.
so 2016-17, we had $96,000 of extra expense, so we went up
We sure
2,000
did.
Oh, yeah.
to
We
7.
had a lot of teachers go for their PhD.
Okay, all right, now, so the question is, the year we're in now, we budgeted 100,000.
Mhm.
We did, and that's based off of the projections. Erica in HR keeps track of
Okay,
who's
alright.
going for
Mhm.
their degree and where they're at with it.
Right, so that 100 will be, we are comfortable this year, or we have fewer people going this year now?
It's
Well,
where
like
they're at
finishing.
in finishing
Yeah,
and how much we're anticipating that they're going to do in that time frame
okay.
is where we put that in.
Yeah. But it was, appeared to be quite a bit less effort, underway for this
Is
year.
the cohort getting a PhD?
I think we
Yes,
have a number of
yes,
administrators
they
who
are. They're
finishing
at
with
the
us.
end of it.
Yeah.
Like who?
Don, Matt, Amy Korn, who else is there? Trudy, Jeremy.
Mhm.
Sorry, Carolano?
Lauren didn't, no.
She dropped out.
Those 5 are at the end of their program.
So would that be reflected in this year's $100,000 budget?
You're gonna see that, it's probably gonna go above 100.
That's what I'm trying to get at.
Yes,
Okay.
Yes.
you're gonna see that go above 100.
Do they get reimbursed when the,
They have to finish the
Complete
course
it
and
and then they get
submit
reimbursed.
the information
Yeah.
and then they get
we don't
reimbursed.
pay anything along the way, we don't help them along?
No, they have
They
to
pay out of
right?
pocket?
But they have to pay first,
pay
complete the
first.
course,
It's
turn in
reimbursed.
the information, and then we
Oh, so
reimburse.
By each course, at the end of each course?
I believe that's how
It's
it's
not at the end
done.
of the degree program?
No,
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 it's
no,
course.
it's by course.
Because this year it looks like we're gonna get ahead, what should have.
Right. No,
No, that's in the
you'll,
background
when we
that we
do
know is-
actuals for 18-19, I would expect that to be higher.
Yep.
Okay. And are we comfortable with what we have in here for next year? 125?
The 125?
Yeah,
I'm going by what we have right now on
The
the books.
information,
Okay.
so unless anyone else.
So
Yeah.
unless unless
Yeah.
there were new applicants that came in and said, hey, we
okay.
wanna do
All right, I
this
just,
too.
because it goes up and down, I'm just.
Yeah, and I don't, this is not an account area that we've ever capped and said first.
Oh, no,
come,
there's
first
no cap.
We haven't had this big of a jump in this account up until recent
Yeah.
years with so many people going
Yeah.
back at one time.
No, you can't cap
So-
it because it's there, it's contractual obligation, so it
Right.
is what it is.
I-
They
you
almost
know,
let it go.
and it's like a double-edged sword, because on the one hand, it's fabulous that all of our people are getting this further education, but on the other hand, then are they gonna leave us?
Right.
You know,
Isn't there an
for
agreement
job
that they
opportunities?
stay?
Yes.
oh,
I
so
think it's 3 years.
3
they have
years
to
is
stay
okay.
after they finish.
interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And it's this is, when you talk about one of the distinguishing characteristics
Oh,
of.
no, I'm all in favor of it. I mean, when we
Right,
contracted, I'm all for it. I mean, we raised in fact, we even raised the tuition reimbursement amount.
That
people we have.
we support the,
Absolutely.
the formal education of our, staff.
Yeah.
Teachers and administrators.
Absolutely.
I think New Canaan might be the only other one that I'm aware of, that does it as generously as we do.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, we increased it over the last budget, contract negotiations, and we raised what the reimbursement was to encourage people to do it, yes. No, I'm all in favor of it.
Well, they heard you. 'Cause they all went.
No, good, I mean, I think it's great, because boy, that for us, then, in our conversations and presentations, it's powerful to say that our teachers are competitive, and they carry these degrees. I mean, it's a very powerful statement, I think. It puts us in a very strong position. Okay, good, all right, so, that's another question.
All right, are we on to special services?
You don't have any questions about special ed, do you? If I could just start with, there are a couple of themes to this budget and what it serves. So I just want to walk you through a little bit, and then we can go line by line and get into the weeds of special ed.
You all know Sharon D'Angelo, I hope.
Oh,
Yes.
I
This is Sharon D'Angelo. Sharon D'Angelo is the Assistant Director of Special Education, and she is
A rock star.
a rock star.
Yep.
I know about that. She is a rock star. I couldn't do it without her at all.
Superstitious,
Not even
but,
close.
Very superstitious.
So one of the themes, the themes of how we're going to spend this money, obviously staffing is critical in all of the work we do in education, and it is the same in special education. I think one of the most important things to know about how we budget is we budget where the kids go. So you'll see some ebb and flow throughout every year. It's where kids are, particularly our kids with the most complex needs. You'll see as they age, services, supports, staffing, FTE all flow with them. And you'll see some of that in this budget. Most notably, we're moving a 1.0 FTE teacher from Middlebrook to the high school because of a rather large and complex 8th grade class moving up to 9th grade. And so that's the kind of themes you'll see throughout the budget. There are some movement of FTE. We make that decision, obviously we budget in September, October for the next year. So we make our initial based on projection. We review again in June based on actual students moving in, moving out, and we do that yet again in early August before we do the final allocation of staffing. Particularly, we've moved to that model in terms of paraprofessional staffing. So that's why we keep the paras kind of in a large pool, because those decisions, they do change as the summer goes on. Students move in, students move out, different needs emerge. And so we want to make sure that we're nimble enough to make those adjustments all the way up to the middle of August. So you'll see.
I'd like to compliment you on being nimble, because we weren't always as nimble as we are now.
Well, it's an adjustment. It's an adjustment to let the buildings know, here's what we think, here's further what we think, and then finally, here's what we need. And I think this past summer, compared to the summer before, in my frame of reference, I think the administrators and teachers and buildings really felt far better supported to know that they don't have to, that the exact numbers are really going to be based on the needs that emerge by mid-August. And we were able to support the needs of students quite effectively that way this year. And the buildings were great about saying, okay, I don't need someone there, we're moving them around. And it's still a challenge in terms of the people themselves, because the culture is, I'm at Cider Mill, or I'm at, so there's still some challenge in terms of moving the actual people, but from an FTE perspective, I think it worked well and served the needs of the students and families quite well. So that's a piece of the puzzle. We also have a theme of cleaning up budgetarily. A year ago, when I was doing the first round of budgeting, we had to we've found some budget anomalies, I guess I can
Yeah.
say, from budget to actual to budget. And so you'll see some of that in here. Particularly, there's a 0.5 psychologist and a 1.0 social
Andrea?
worker. Yes,
Andrew, can I interrupt?
sure.
I need to drop, actually, I don't need to drop off, I need to have you guys hang out.
Okay.
Sure.
I've got another meeting. So, and Kevin, I had emailed questions.
Yes, I have them.
Before
How
that.
does that voice come
Yeah.
from? I completely forgot.
We listen at a phone.
I'm like,
Sorry, Gretchen, go ahead.
I had emailed questions to you guys earlier today.
yes, she did.
For Andrea.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah,
If you could.
I'll add them to the board questions document and
that's exactly what we'll do.
Okay.
All
Thanks,
right,
guys.
okay,
Bye,
Thanks,
Gretch.
Andrea.
thank you. So there are a couple of FTE that are actual bumps up and actual bumps down, and then there are some that are budget cleanup, I would call them. And so you'll see that in there, and I can detail for you where the actual additions are or the actual decreases are. We have a decrease of a 0.4 teacher of the hearing impaired, and that's an actual decrease in FTE. Based on both student need and it's through attrition. Our current teacher of the hearing impaired is going to reduce her time down. And we don't necessarily, she's a multi-certified person. She holds multiple certifications, not just teacher of the hearing impaired. And when we looked at her work, she did use a fair portion of her FTE to do more special ed teacher work. So what we've done is we've reduced the FTE down, and we're only funding for what is actual need of a teacher of the hearing impaired. Does that make sense? And have reassigned the special ed teacher role to the special ed teachers in the building. Cider Mill and Miller Driscoll predominantly. Okay, so that's an actual reduction. We have a small bump up of a 0.2, I believe, speech and language pathologist. That's for movement of kids with intensive language needs from middle to high, that complex class. And then we have, it looks as if there's a 0.5 increase in psychologist. That is not an increase in the total FTE of psychology. That's a budget cleanup. It looks like we're reducing a social worker. That is not a reduction. It is a budget cleanup. So there's some budget cleanup work from budget to actual to budget that just needs to be cleaned up, and I think this will do it. So we talked about staffing. On a professional learning perspective, you're gonna see a bump in professional learning. I think what's important to remember about our professional learning line is that we meet the needs of a very diverse population of certified staff and paraprofessionals. So it's not, everybody doesn't get the same thing. They have a school psychologist needs something different from a social worker, needs something different from a speech and language pathologist. So we're trying to build in for that differentiated model of professional learning for those different disciplines. And so that's where you see us, our focus of professional learning. We continue our work in structured literacy. I think Wilton should be proud to know that we are currently have 43 teachers who have earned their classroom educator or Gillingham certification. We have, of those 43, I think it's 27 have moved to the next level, and can't remember what the second level of certification is called at the moment, but associate level certification in Norton Gillingham. So that's a fairly very rigorous program of not only classroom learning, but actual clinical supervision. So that's been an investment that I think sits built in very well compared to our peer group, and provides a level of expertise in that structured literacy for students with dyslexia. We are continuing our work on the comprehensive evaluation. Next year we hope to do some intensive work with our school psychologists so that they can lead the evaluation teams to a thorough and comprehensive evaluation. You'll see in our contracted services line, there's a bump up of about $90,000. that really represents a dramatic increase in the number of requests for independent educational evaluations, which is it's a function under IDEA that someday if we ever have a special ed workshop, it's one that when a parent asks for an independent educational evaluation at public expense, we as a district have two options. We say yes and fund it, or we say no and file for an immediate due process hearing to defend our own evaluation. And so balancing off the need to build relationships, maintain relationships, cost of legal fees and due process, I do think there will be times when we need to defend our evaluations for a number of reasons, but certainly it's something that's quite a cost center with a number of people who are.
Who would make that decision? You?
No.
Or you and Kevin together? Or who would make that decision?
About whether or not to go to due process? It's the PPT team really makes the decision. I've developed a process to help our teams learn how to do it. How do they make a determination about whether or not the evaluation we've conducted is comprehensive based on legal standards and not what do we think? So we've developed a process to help the teams think through that decision making. So I spend a fair amount of time going over and pulling the records with them so that we teach our staff how to make those decisions in the moment. Ultimately, Kevin and I would talk about, I would never file for the due process hearing without having shared that with Kevin
It's a
And
really
for a
important
million
question because
Well,
this is the
yeah,
problem with
this is-
special ed litigation today.
Right.
It's when it shifts from being about the student, what's best for him or her, to being a business decision.
Right, so at this point, over the last 2 years since you've been, how have we ever had to go and have we ever had to file? Or have we filed the due process?
Well, we haven't filed for the due process hearing yet. I'm currently monitoring 3 cases.
3.
Not all of them are independent educational evaluation cases. They have other issues. Some, likely right now, one will
We'll
go
go?
to a hearing to protect the district, actually.
Okay.
I think before, from my understanding, when a parent asked for an independent evaluation, we just approved it. And now we're making better decisions based
Right.
upon your training.
Well, I'm asking people to make a decision. When I came here, it became clear that the minute those 3 letters, I-E-E, were said, it was like a Pavlovian response. There was no decision making, there was no thoughtfulness.
We did.
It was just I-E-E, yes,
Yeah.
and move forward.
Okay.
So I'm trying to, it's an example, I'm trying to get teams of educators and parents working together to actually make decisions so that the PPT process is a thoughtful decision-making process and not simply
And a positive
I
process.
want X,
Yeah.
you want, and the answer can only be yes or no. So this is just one example of how we're trying to move our PPTs to what the framers of the legislation wanted was a creative problem-solving process and not just a Chinese menu of, I want 1 from column X and 2 from column Y.
Okay.
So that's some of the work we're
This
doing.
decision-making is defensible.
Well, and it's thoughtful, and, in the land of mindfulness, it's a thoughtful process that focuses in on the needs of the child at the time, and is collaborative with parents. So that's part of our professional learning. And obviously, we're always looking at fiscal responsibility, so Ann Kelly Lenz and Marianne and Michelle Kelly in my office, we began last year a redesign of how we calculate and capture all of the costs of high-cost students to capture more money in our excess cost grant from the state, to make sure we're capturing every penny of reimbursement that Wilton is entitled to. Last year at budget time, I had some cautious optimism that we were going to capture more money, but I wasn't ready to go out publicly yet in case, being new and all, I wasn't, I didn't want to put my head on the chopping block too soon, but we did capture more money. significantly more money.
That's why it's-
And so, part of the response to where you see in our tuition line and our special ed transportation
Is
line,
that the reason for it?
we are
Yes.
applying that additional money. That's why you see those lines, looking as decreases. In terms of particularly the tuition line, it is still a volatile line. And I wanna make sure that while it looks good and we can celebrate and, you can applaud me later, you know, I wanna make sure that people recognize that this is not a decrease in the number of students needing outplacements. In fact, those numbers are going up. But because we're capturing more money, in terms of the excess cost provision and applying it to that line, it's not all being applied, it's not having as dramatic a negative impact on the budget. Does that make sense?
So it's
Yeah,
excess
yeah.
cost per those individual kids?
It's all of the excess cost for all the kids. So even kids who are internal, who don't have outplacements, but who hit the excess cost threshold, we've applied excess cost to the tuition and transportation line for outplacements.
We can do, well, obviously we can do that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a reimbursement. So,
Yeah.
for example, a child who has a one-to-one paraprofessional and a lot of OT and PT and speech, and those kids tend to hit the excess cost threshold internal to the district.
Right.
We pay for those staff, we budget at their full FTE. So I don't need to reimburse those accounts. Does that make sense? So if we get about 75 cents on the dollar back after we hit a threshold, another great workshop on excess cost. Then we're now applying it to
The tuition.
tuition and transportation, to be transparent, to understand where does that money go? That's where it's gonna go.
Is there a line where we show excess cost total?
Not in the budget.
We don't
no.
show it in our budget.
No,
You're not-
you're not allowed to
You're not
budget
allowed
for
to
it,
budget for it.
the excess cost. And then the
It-
revenue comes in on the town side, so you don't see that netting.
If we were gonna show it, then the town would have to show it as
If you were gonna show it, it wouldn't be in the total.
Yeah.
You'd be showing it somewhere.
Yeah,
Not in
it's
the
not
total.
allowed to be budgeted, so you're always gonna show that overage at the end of the year because the offset is sitting on the town side for the reimbursement.
yes, and the town shows the reimbursement.
We show the reimbursement, and then when we're doing financials, like right now, I'm going through the audit, we take that revenue and net it against the expenditures on the, Board of Ed side to bring it back in line.
Okay, so, but if you're thinking that you can reduce, you're budgeting based on a projected reduction, you're gonna, for that.
Right.
So, I just don't understand how that bookkeeping works, I guess I'm confused.
So, your budget, you have the estimate, I don't wanna speak for you if I'm,
No,
I'll
go
talk about
right
that.
ahead.
So, we're estimating what that reimbursement is going to be because of the different timelines of when you put in the application for the reimbursement. And from what I understand now, it's January, March, and the end, I think, of June, some point.
It's
So-
December, March, and June.
Yeah, no, I understand, but
And-
if you're thinking that somebody's actually gonna cost 100,000, I mean, I'm just pulling a name
Mhm.
or a number out of the hat, so if there's 100,000, that's gonna be the actual outplacement cost. And you're thinking, I have all this, not all this, but I have some excess cost reimbursement money, so it's really gonna charge us about 70s, that's what I'm gonna put in the budget.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
But where does that 30,000 sit? You know,
It
I'm
doesn't
just
sit anywhere,
kinda-
it's unbudgeted, so you're gonna go over budget. It's not an item, you're not gonna see it anywhere in the budget, cause you're gonna tax for something you're getting back. So you're not allowed technically under state statute to budget for that excess cost.
Yeah,
No, but
no,
what's the
But
actual
we spend
cost? You
our-
can
Yeah.
budget
Oh,
70, what's
well,
the actual
No, we budget
cost?
70,
But it
but at
actually
the
is
end, it's gonna be
100.
100, but then we get the
We're gonna
reimbursement
show,
back.
we're gonna show the
We're-
overage.
We show
We're
the,
gonna start
we show the
budget.
overage.
When
We'll
you
show
see
wherever
the
budget.
financial reports,
The reconciliations
spring
that happen at the
happens,
town.
you're gonna see that tuition line is gonna look like it's over budgeted
budgeted.
by
$1 million,
$30.
$1
$1.5
million,
million.
$1.5 million,
Yeah.
$1.6 million, and everyone's gonna break a sweat. And they're like, what's that? What's that all about?
Okay.
It happens every year, everywhere, not just here. And then at the end of the year, when the excess cost grant comes to the district, it'll be applied against that overage
And
so
we're
that at
back
the
in line
end,
budget.
you as a Board of Ed
But the
Because
full
we
amount goes
can't-
up to.
Yeah, but
we can't-
but if we've always done it that way, then how can this year be a decrease? That's my real question.
Because of the work we did to capture every
Actually
penny,
more.
we came in with significantly more money.
Debbie, let me give you a reference on that if you want. Between the 2 years with Andrea, before Andrea, we got 1.2 back. Now we're getting, this time we got 1.6. So we had that shift in getting additional funds back that we probably could have gotten before. So we know that the work that Andrea's office is doing is gonna get us back more funds.
You know, for her example, Michigan, we have students internally who never get outplaced. But the total cost of what we do for them across all of the areas, they are now qualified, it exceeds
Yeah, I
and qualifies.
understand. Okay, I
So
understand that.
then we never,
Oh, I see what you're saying.
probably,
Yeah.
the
No, I-
quality board never went
Yeah,
after them.
no, I
I know
think
what
I
you're
understand it.
Okay.
It's just the accounting of it is confusing me, which doesn't take much, so it's not, I don't wanna hold it up, so.
And then you'll see that I have requested a coordinator or assistant director for secondary special education, an additional FTE. You know, from the time I started, I will tell you that I do believe the leadership of special education from a pre-K to 21 perspective is understaffed. Poor Sharon is spread far too thin, and we spend most of our time in crisis management rather than getting ahead of issues and being able to work at an earlier stage. So we're putting out fires all the time, and that's not a good way to run a Department of Special Education. You really need people who are boots on the ground, providing support to parents, especially to students in individual programming, and being able to spend a fair amount of time doing a bird's eye view, a big picture analysis of current programming, current levels of training and professional learning of staff, and the secondary schools have been sorely neglected.
So then would you assign, with Sharon, then you would take what, K to
Pre-K
five?
through 5?
Pre-K to 5
Pre-K to,
and then,
it would be a pre-K to 5,
uh-huh,
and then a 6 to 21
okay,
split.
okay.
Do
you have
any
any,
questions, are you gonna divide it elementary, secondary?
Yeah,
Okay.
it would be an elementary, secondary here, so that they, so that each coordinator could really focus in on not only the two schools, but the level. You know, elementary, it's really primarily the focus is on literacy and numeracy instruction, making sure that that instruction is top-notch, early identification, early intervention, intensive instruction. Come middle and high school, you begin to focus on that big T transition, and making sure that the students have the skills and competencies necessary, quality transition planning, and making sure that the students are taking ownership of their plan. And that's a big piece of the work that is really sorely needed.
The other opportunity that I see with this is we've never had good vertical structures in our related services. So, because everything's done at the building, you get these, in some cases, wildly dramatically different interpretations of how services should be delivered in terms of caseload, staffing, group size, etc. So with some additional leadership in this office, we can have vertical departments. And Sharon's already running speech and language. We've seen some gains there, but psychology, social work, etc. And that'll be a structure that will, I think, additionally strengthen the department as a whole.
Also, particularly at the elementary, because of the way Wilton has structured its elementary schools, K2 and 3-5, building a stronger bridge, K2 and 3-5. I know that both Kathy Kuhn and Jen Mitchell are leading the way in trying to create a pre-K5 continuum and bringing the bridge closer. I think doing so in special education will be critical. And having, you know, Sharon's expertise to really lead the way, I think would be of tremendous benefit to all of the schools. From a parent perspective, if you have a child with a need, you want someone who understands that need. And our leaders at the building level they have tremendous strengths, but they can't possibly know with a depth of understanding the kinds of needs that a child with autism brings to the table. And that is a function that if you talk to the parents of children with more complex needs, they'll tell you that just having someone who already knows what autism is and can talk that talk brings reassurance that they're heard and they're understood. And I think that this will bring a tremendous value to the whole district.
May I? Okay. I have no problem with the budget. I do not profess to know or read at all what you go through and what your needs are and the intricacies of what you do. I think it's good. Okay, I think you guys do a phenomenal job. My only comment is, we're gonna hear again about the DMC report. It's gonna come. Where's the savings? Where's the savings? Now you're 2 years in, where are the big savings that we were told we were going to see? So I think the reality is we need to be prepared. How are we going to address that and a response to that? As I look at the student population that you defined, I look at the total FTE equivalents you have here, a ratio of 1 to 4, full-time FTE for every 4 students in the special ed area. That doesn't seem to be moving in the direction that the DMC report told us we could do. Because the premise of their report was that we're doing too much individualized instruction or individualized partnering because the person was not totally qualified to be where we could collectively think if you had a person who was an expert in English, whatever it is, they could do 5 or 6 students, do it in a group environment and eliminate the need for all the one-on-one. What I'm saying makes sense to you? Yeah.
It does. I would
Okay.
just say, in that we've also
Yeah.
added an 18 to 21 program.
Well, and the
proposing
point
that.
being, yeah,
So
and
that impacts staffing.
yeah, but I think the 1 to 4 is going to come into question. Everybody looks at it.
Mhm.
And it's pretty rich on the surface. You guys who go inside of the surface say, not at all. We need more. Okay, and you're probably right. So the two things are the ratio there, and then how do we address the response that's going to come from the public, from those friends in the public who are still looking for the $2 million savings that the DMC report said we were going to get. Okay, and I think we need to really figure out how we're going to answer that.
Glenn, I thought we addressed that.
Yeah.
I mean, is having Nate Levinson come back and speak to the
Yeah.
board a year ago
Yeah.
and describe
Yeah, I
the
understand.
reality of Fairfield County.
I understand that.
Sure.
But it's not something that issue is never going to be a closed book.
No, and no good deed goes unpunished around here. And I
Exactly.
think,
Okay.
and
Exactly.
I say that in all
Keeps on
seriousness.
No, and that's why I'm raising it, because we need
Sure.
to be prepared. We need to
I
be
do
ready.
think there are some structures
Okay.
here that, there are some structures in Wilton, and this is not a negative at all. A lot of our staff, particularly our related services staff, they aren't solely assigned to children with special needs as identified under IDEA.
Yeah.
We have students who receive services under 504
Mhm.
that were never contemplated in the DMC study at all.
Yeah.
We also have, for example, school psychologists. Our school psychologists across the continuum are working with
All the
students who
students,
aren't
yeah.
identified with disabilities.
Right.
So, and those things were never contemplated in the DMC study in the least. So I do think that there are, and that's not to say, we have moved the dime on the DMC study.
Okay, good. And that's
Right,
where
we
you-
are working with, we are
Group size,
asking
contact
students, we're
time.
looking at group size.
Okay.
We're looking at it in the context of average group size, because there are some students, by nature of their disability, require one-to-one instruction.
I understand.
And so we can't go down the road of no one ever gets one-to-one again.
Yeah.
But that also means in order to bump your average group size, you're gonna have some groups of 4 and 5 when it's appropriate. And
You
to
still have
allow
a
for the
one-on-one.
decision-making on the ground when a child
Yeah.
needs more intensive instruction. So we're working with, and we're seeing some movement in the average group size. But it is slow.
Yeah.
It's shifting based on the needs of kids. A lot of the work happening in Miller Driscoll, I think we're going to start to see shifts as they roll up into Cider Mill. And so it's a process, and it is a process that takes time. I think what you'll notice is that we're making these shifts and we're not seeing companion high-level increases in things like legal fees.
Mhm.
That's a good sign
Yeah.
that we're working collaboratively with the families, we're meeting individual student needs. Because if you blow up special ed
Oh, no.
in a way to
Please.
say, cut
Yeah.
$2 million willy-nilly, you're gonna see a $2 million bump in your legal
Oh,
fees.
and we know
right?
from our neighbor,
And so
that's
we
the
wanna
risk.
be careful.
I
It
got
is a very gentle process.
Yeah.
It's not change that is, it's more evolutionary change.
No,
If you wanna think about it it's an evolution
Yeah,
versus a big bang.
yeah,
You
no,
know,
I get it,
So-
I understand that,
What Glenn is bringing up is that you don't need to convince the Board of Education.
yeah,
But,
please.
but I would
I
say
We
to
get it.
Glenn, but also
Yeah.
to you, I would say it's the same
It's the same
individuals,
person.
the same person. And so I think we just repeat what we repeated last
Yeah.
year and keep it simple because
Stay on track,
because
keep
we've
doing
known
what you're
this
doing,
woman,
yeah.
this
Yeah.
individual for, decades, and it's
Yeah.
never enough.
No, and, I think where we're perhaps better equipped to speak to that, I think, I'd say a couple of things. If you widen the lens beyond SPED, I'm proud of the fact that we've turned over just about every stone we could find to try to find efficiencies.
Yeah.
And I think
Well, it
that
shows throughout the
speaks for
budget, I
itself.
mean, look,
Right.
it's,
We've come down, even if you factor in the increases in staffing this year, we're still down net 15 over 5 years.
Yeah.
And then you look more recently at the comparative ratios across our DIRG, with the exception of counselors, psychologists, social workers at the elementary level, we have our ratio there is lower,
Right.
right? So we're more richly staffed at the elementary level. I think we can make an argument for early intervention that makes a lot of sense. Our ratios are much higher comparatively. So when when someone shows up and says, "Where's my $2 million?" It's not available yet. Is the answer, and we are not an outlier
yeah.
in terms of the services that we provide.
Look, I get it, and I
Yeah.
understand that, and you know that, I'm just saying, we need
Yeah.
to be ready, we need to be prepared.
Okay,
And
and I would
I
say
also-
we all need to take a
Right.
turn at the mic
Yeah.
and weigh in.
I would also, in terms of understanding what's happening in the world of special education at the state and national level, the prevalence rate of children with disabilities is going up. After years of stability at the national level at about 11.5%, 12%, and Connecticut being the same, we're pushing 14 at the state. It would not be a surprise if at the next time we do prevalence rates, we do it October 1. At that next one, that Connecticut as a state is reaching about 15% of children with disabilities. So as that emerges, you have the two competing you have two factors. One is autism and the autism spectrum, that spectrum of disability, and you also have this very, very volatile and increasing number of students with significant mental health issues. Those are the two very, very intense categories right now. Autism is actually feeling more stable. We know that. This population of students with more intensive mental health issues is a growing population across the state of Connecticut,
It's
very
easily
much so
understood.
across the DIRG.
It's easily understood if you look at the stress the parents are under. In this
So,
state. It's
you know.
it is, from my perspective, a major contributing
Sure,
factor.
yeah, family systems, absolutely.
Uh,
I don't know that we really have a good handle on all the causal issues yet, just like autism. We don't know what's causing this, but when you sit in our seats, what's causing it, I hope there are smart people out there trying to figure out the cause. We've got to deal with the implications. And trying to educate students who are suffering with co-occurring mental health issues is very, very challenging.
Well, it would go to my next question in the school psychologist arena. Do we have enough? Are we adequately staffed?
I do think we're adequately staffed at this point. I think we've got work to do on the training end. We've got work to do with helping, I think, the work we're doing with Ruler is gonna be important to set the stage for tier one, for what we need to teach all kids in that social and emotional realm, so that we can begin to teach those skills very early. Emotion regulation, interpersonal relationships, interpersonal effectiveness, how to fail and get back up again. How to do those things. We really those are gonna be direct instructional options.
Yeah.
And then our special ed and mental health folks are going to need to develop a skill set on how to help those students where those skills are lagging significantly, such that they are meeting the standards for disability.
Can you, on the enrollment piece for some of these services, including psychologists, it's hard to understand.
It is.
So how you can go from 1,000 kids one year to 900 to 350, back up to 565.
Yeah.
Some note that explains it's either this program or that program or this grade level because the enrollment figures don't jive with
I
your
don't think
staffing.
there's some some of this, like, if you go back time.
Yeah,
When
but
you
e-
look
but
back
even-
and you
but even
try to piece together
this year
how
to
they
next
were
year
doing
is
it.
kind of crazy.
Yeah.
So, and there's a couple of places where that happens,
Yeah.
not just in psych services.
You know, I've never been comfortable with the way that we report enrollment in this budget, but in this way, for that reason. There's just, because these are all built, it's not, and it happened not just in special services, but across the district. These pages are built. It's,
But in special
Whatever
ed, I
they're
think
looking at.
sometimes they're doing just that, sometimes taking into consideration we're servicing everyone in the school.
right, or the
And
kids
sometimes we're
with
servicing just the sped kids, and it's just who reported what on that year.
Right, so
And
it's
so
just,
it's not
again, it's a
consistent,
matter of
it's
knowing
almost
some-
worth taking
some
it out.
explanation. Right.
I think what will ultimately help is for us to get a sense that some of the metrics out of the DIRG in terms of FTE per X number of students.
Ratios, yeah.
Those kinds of ratios, I think, would help people understand, the number of school psychologists per 500 students
get it.
is a better model to look at that, because one student could need you all day, every day, and one student could need you for 5 minutes a month, and it's hard to get a good,
And are you
even
serving
when I
both
say
those?
565.
Yeah, right,
Yeah.
right.
That
No,
doesn't
I
tell
get
you
it, I get it.
anything.
I just wanted to raise the question,
Yeah.
so.
I think coming up with a metric that levels the playing field for the size of our school, for example, right? Because if you look at, for example, a Fairfield school has 275 students and 1.0 psychologist.
Right,
Cider Mill has 3.0 psychologists, both are elementary schools, but their size differential is enormous. So those are the kinds of things that I think will help bring an apples to apples versus that. It's hard, that number never makes sense to me.
Okay, all right. And then my my other question is on the secondary coordinator and the addition of a person. And again, anticipating some of the public concerns about, here's another administrator.
Sure.
So I think the answer around proactive, I think the answer around responsive in real time, I think the vertical alignment and the transitions between buildings and the staff, consistency and sort of getting the message so we're all on the same page, rowing in the same direction, I think go a long way. One thing that I would like to suggest or like to add is a concern around data collection in special ed, and that's a little bit, Chuck, why I asked the question about data and the performance matters warehouse. I'm not sure sometimes that the board, or at least me, gets enough data around student outcomes in special ed. Some of that's growth in testing, some of it's number of IEP goals met, exiting, level of service, group size. We're not getting quite enough of a picture. So I am hoping that with the addition of an administrator and or deployment of our current data person, that we can get more information.
I do think having just the additional resource, so that we're not spending our time in crisis management, and be able to do some of that big picture global thinking about what does our data tell us about outcomes, how do we bridge
So
that.
this allows us to be more
I do think it will
strategic.
allow us to be far more strategic than we're able to be now. Right now, we can be strategic on individual students, it's harder to be strategic at that upper level because we just don't have the boots on the ground with the expertise needed to make that happen.
One of the things that I could just add really quick, that I've, in my experience, or this is my fourth year now, that I've noticed over the last 2 years in my role, is the pull towards the secondary in the area of the outplacement, the students that are either already outplaced or are on that track because of the level of need of that particular student and the family maintenance that goes along with it. I spend such a great deal of time with those students. In a given week, I mean, I must have, 5 to 6 meetings just with outplacement facilities, parents, meeting with the students. And I couldn't possibly do it alone, so I'm also pulling either my ILs or special ed teachers to help to either come with me on those because they have to be a liaison, because these students that are either already outplaced or on the track of being outplaced, they don't, for lack of a better way to put it, just sort of go into a category where we don't see them or work with them anymore. We have a very strong bond with them. It's one of the things that we pride ourselves on because we want them to come back. We want them to be included. We want them to always be a part of whatever building that they are, at the time. And I mean, I can't even tell it. I mean, the amount of time that I am spending in that capacity alone. Elementary, there's very few K to 2. We have maybe about 10 at Cider Mill. But at Millbrook now, we're pushing 20, and at the high school, we're over almost 30. And it's an enormous amount of time. Because we're talking about outside professionals, psychologists, all kinds of doctors that are involved, and just coordinating that, it's just unbelievable. And I don't even know that anyone realizes the amount of time that takes. And the amount of PPTs, typically those students, they're not outplaced, and then we see them once a year. I mean, we're meeting constantly because we are still overseeing their programs, even though they're in another school. I'm on the road visiting all the time to make sure that the outplacements are, doing what they need to be doing. And those are the ones that come with a lot of the legal issues attached to them, so I'm constantly meeting with Andrea about those. It's just, I want to make sure that piece of it doesn't get lost in the overall data. It really is an enormous undertaking, especially for the secondary.
Sure.
I'm going to be sad, to be honest with you, if we do get the secondary corner to lose my bond with some of these kids and these parents. But we, in my former district, we had an outplacement coordinator because obviously it was a bigger district and the numbers were high, but there's a lot of work that goes into that, and that secondary level is just we're so remiss to not have that as part of what we're doing. I can't possibly be at K2 when I'm dealing with all of that, and luckily we have Kathy and team running the show over there, because to be honest with you, it's Cider Mill and up is where I'm spending my time right now.
Well, and one way of looking at it is insurance.
Yeah, I think I see it as it's another cost avoidance strategy.
Absolutely.
Just want to make sure that amount of data, if it can be captured in any way, gets put into what you're talking about, because I think your point is
And that's
an
fine.
excellent
That's
point,
fine.
because it's,
And then another data-related question would be the idea of either cost avoidance or redeployment of resources. So one way of reading the DMC report is to say that it wasn't a cost-saving report. The goal was how can we best service kids? And finding that, there's too many paraprofessionals and not enough certified reading teachers. That's
Right.
one example. So we'll just, we need to make some shifts in redeployment. So I think that's part of the answer to the DMC report.
yes.
But the other thing around special ed is that as we start either read and writing workshop, or we do more in tier 1, or we start community steps, or we're gonna talk about an alternative school, you have raised the idea of cost avoidance.
Yes.
And I know it's hard to put an exact dollar on it, but we need to get some sense of either a time frame or the type of student that we are going to be recapturing in district versus out of district, for example, or needing a one-to-one aid versus now he or she doesn't. So again, more data, more pictures around, it's better to do it this way, and there's some cost avoidance in terms of expensive outplacements, but on the other hand, we've had to raise costs over here.
I did a little, when I report next week around the alternative school, I've done some simulation of a cost avoidance. But I also, in response to one of your questions, I did a little analysis of the Community Steps program, which is the most recent cost avoidance strategy. And
And good for kids strategy.
great for kids,
Yeah.
programmatically the right way to go, absolutely, no doubt about it, but it's also resulting in cost avoidance. And so when I looked at the number, and I'll, in the answer, I'll give you the exact number, in the response to, the questions we've gotten. But the same students, if we still programmed the way we used to, would cost us about $450,000, not even thinking about transportation. The students, what they cost us in terms of the Community Steps program, all in with transportation, costs us about 280, give or take a little bit. So that is $100 and some odd thousand of cost avoidance.
Okay, and that was gonna be my other
Right, you
concern.
can't call it savings because it needed an investment, but 2 years later, we are
Not spending.
not spending,
Spending less than
Right.
we might otherwise spend,
But-
exactly.
right? So that's what I mean by cost avoidance.
Sure, sure.
You know, so when we talk about the alternative school, it has a price tag, it's not free. But if done well, and if it does what we hope it would, 2 years down the line, you will start to see cost avoidance.
No, it's a redeployment of resources that you hope results in somewhat greater efficiency, maybe not perfect.
Won't
It's
be
not,
perfect.
you're not looking for savings, like, oh, look,
Right.
the bargain store, but you're
Right.
looking for more. But that, my last little question, is, around the 2.0 paraprofessionals being added to community steps. And the enrollment increase is only shown as 3 kids, so that makes me wonder. Unless the enrollment's off, or you're underserved now, or,
No, it's about the nature of the kids coming up. The
Okay.
current kids in Community Steps are at a higher level of independence than the 3 kids coming in.
okay,
So those 3 kids
They need more staff
require
time.
more staff time and
Okay.
directedness.
all right, fair
It's
point.
it's about the nature of the individual need. And that program, you're gonna see a fair amount of ebb and flow, because even though they are, the level of need they have in terms of their current independent skill out there in the world without walls around them may be higher. Right now, the focus we have is we have a whole system working, beginning at the preschool, on independence building for our kids with more significant needs, that has assessment structures in place. We're really looking at not waiting till 18 to say, oh boy, we have to teach independence. We're teaching independence age appropriately, to 3-year-olds.
Okay. Laura, do you have any questions?
She answered all of my questions. Everyone was here upon. Yeah, I mean, my general question is just, no, maybe Sharon could speak to this more, is just, I kinda like to get a sense as to what the Andrea effect has been on our school district. Well, I assume it's a positive, I mean, we already touched on one earlier about that whole, you know, you get to the I don't even, the letters, I don't know what the letters were. You get to this point and, you know, in the past, the moment that came out of the parent's mouth, we were off to litigation, you know, that kind of thing. So I'm just wondering, where else have we been feeling the Andrea effect?
I think it's been an incredibly strong positive effect across the district in how everybody processes and problem solves their situations, to be more just generally, you know, Andre did a year of the listening tour and got a really good feel of where everyone's questions were in the district and just sort of the climate. And then we really, you know, over the summer dug in and just said, we're gonna tackle this, and this is how we're gonna do it. And I think the biggest takeaway is that everyone is feeling a little bit more, comfortable with making their independent decisions based on the best interest of the child in a very thoughtful way, rather than a very, prescriptive way. And I don't mean that to say, I mean, Anne had an amazing effect on, rapport with everybody. It's just, in that time, it was kind of like, this is what you say when this happens, and this is what we do, this is what we do. And I do feel a lot of people are now really making their own thoughtful decisions and not having to sort of say, you know, call me every day and say, what do I say when they say this, or I need you at that PPT because I can't, there's an advocate there. And I'm not gonna do that PPT without you or Andrea, and we're really starting to see the effects of that. And I think people feel that the directive has really been like, it is okay, you are the professional in that area, you know what to do, you need to think through things thoughtfully, put the child first, and figure out what makes the most sense. So that's been a really huge shift. I think we're just starting, took people a while to kind of trust that, but we are really starting to see that, which is what we were trying to do from the beginning. We meet with the administrative teams every week, and we try to problem solve collectively what's going on as a culture in that building, so that they can then go ahead and do what they need to do in their buildings without Andre and I just being held up in meetings all day,
Right.
making decisions for people, or, and I think some of the processes that have been put in place as well by Andrea, the IEE is one example, which is also linked to the comprehensive evaluation work that we've done. So we've taken our program meetings and we've talked to them about what is a comprehensive, what should it look like? Let's start there. Before you say yes or no to an IEE, what does your evaluation look like? Did we hit everything? What would, if you were the parent of this child and that was the evaluation, did the reports make sense? Are we using too much jargon? It has just in every aspect of comprehensive evals. The reading piece, we're diving into, one of the biggest things that we took away from the reading was that we didn't have a really good system for data keeping with our goals and benchmarks for reading. So Andrea, we talked about what would be the best way to go. So we took the Dibbles M class, we did a whole bunch of training on that. We went into that programs and now have an expectation of data presentation for every single PST and every single PPT, which prior to that, everyone was just kind of doing their own thing and we didn't really have an expectation around that, and that's been huge. Professional learning, I can't even begin to tell you how thankful everybody is about the respect for the professional learning that they've been asking for, and that Andrea's been really just diving in and allowing people to kind of pick what they need for their discipline and supporting it. I'm getting a lot of pushback because they're out of their buildings. I think that's the only downside. But it's been amazing. I mean, I get thank you emails weekly, it's, everyone's finally being heard, with their professional learning. Because so much of the professional learning, goes through into the reading and into the math and the writing, and sometimes special ed doesn't always get the opportunity to jump on that, and not that Chuck doesn't invite them, because he does, it's just a matter of how many teachers can be out of the building at once and things like that, but we've really found ways to do it this year, so that's been amazing.
I can tell you that I used to get frequent calls from administrators asking for some technical assistance, and since Andrea's gotten here, it's completely dropped off.
Because she
She's
tells
really
me not
nice.
to call you. Don't call Chuck.
That's.
I didn't mean this to be a performance appraisal or whatever,
Yeah, but good job, Sharon.
Well, no,
Well,
I-
yeah, I don't know if that answers your
Yeah,
question,
it
but
does.
there's been a lot of very positive feedback. And I myself, I was my fourth special ed director, assistant superintendent that I've worked for, and I thoroughly learned a ton in a very short amount of time.
Well, it's
Very
amazing,
appreciative.
like what I'm hearing, it's amazing what you can accomplish when people feel empowered.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
That's the biggest.
to make their
Wilton
own,
has
you
some, you have extraordinary teachers here.
Yeah. But if they
And
don't
paras and
yeah,
speech
but they don't.
pathologists, and I do feel like, my job more than anything else is to unleash them.
Right, exactly, rather than
Right, to
to
give
tell
them the
them.
freedom to
use that expertise.
And
Yeah,
they
yeah,
have the
yeah,
expertise,
Yeah.
but they're a little shy,
Gun-shy,
and they're a little
yeah.
timid,
Mhm.
and they're a little afraid. And so my
Well, I don't
job
think
is
there
to
was
build
clear
their,
community.
Right, I don't think there were
Yeah.
clear understandings of what they could do,
Yeah.
so.
you know, and so I want to unleash that a little bit, and I want them coming into meetings with the confidence, and the sense that the community understands how truly gifted they are. And I don't know that they get enough credit for how truly gifted they are, and the kind of miracles that they sometimes work. And so my job is to make sure I reflect that back to them, so they see it and they understand it, and they're and that we can communicate that to the community. And I think
You know, it's
that-
hard because I
Yeah.
talk to a lot of the parents and we discuss it now. And I think the parental reaction overall the last few years has just been phenomenal. It really has, and they see the changes, and they are most appreciative.
Yeah.
For the most part, you're always gonna have somebody.
Yes.
But I have to tell you, for the most part, the parents of these kids right now are really, really happy is not the right word, but pleased with what we're doing for them.
There's some
and
great
what we're
things
doing.
happening.
They really are. And
There's
we've
always
got a-
work to do,
we've got a
always work to do, but there are some
$50,000
great
increase
things
in the
happening.
training budget for next year.
Yep.
And obviously, it appears to be money well spent, well
It's
invested.
been amazing.
So,
Really
yeah, it's a
has.
big 500% increase.
Yeah.
What result of it? Obviously, there's a reason for it.
Now, can I ask a question of the business operations? I know you've been collecting data. I wonder whether or not, because I remember a few years ago at a board meeting, you were railing against the year after year tremendous increase in the expenses around special ed. I wonder if that has slowed.
Oh, I wasn't railing against it. I mean, I was just, it is what it is. I mean, I've always been a supporter. I've never been.
No, but I think that
The
we
community
were,
has been.
we were experiencing some pretty hefty increases for a number of
Yeah.
years. My sense is that probably has slowed down.
Oh, I think
quite a
so.
bit.
Are you thinking, so you like percentage
Yeah.
increase
Yes.
annually?
Maybe we can go back and do a 5-year track.
I think
We'll
we
get it
should.
worthwhile.
Can we even do that with the way that we've moved things around to get apples to apples?
Special ed, you should be able to. do
Marion's
it.
gonna jump out a window.
Yeah, that's
So,
I think the difficulty
Yeah.
right
Focus
now
on
is
the
with a
next one.
rising statewide prevalence rate
Yeah,
and a decreasing statewide total population.
yeah.
It's gonna look like special ed is taking more of the pie than it used to, even though the total,
But I think the
You know,
percent increase
Yeah.
in this district year
Yeah.
after year has been.
It has, of course.
Yeah.
Regardless
And we're
of the
moving
shift.
forward.
That's a good
Yeah.
story,
Right.
particularly around DMC.
Yeah, I think it
Yes.
could be a
Yeah.
good story,
Yeah.
if you look at it, yeah.
you know, we're really continuously improving without
Yeah.
just looking for more and more and more.
Right,
Yeah.
So,
perfect.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's-
bravo, ladies.
Before you gavel close,
Okay.
I wanna just review, because there were some follow-up items here that have come up over the last 3 days, I just wanna make sure I didn't miss anything. So we're gonna plan some workshops, TC is one of them, the Futures College Readers Writers. Follow up on the preschool program and creative curriculum. I wrote down, based on some of the conversation, some curriculum unit sampling. I don't know that needs to be a full workshop, but looking at the format, the structure, and how curriculum units are developed, like Ross Green, participation fee analysis, then plan to introduce participation fees at Roy Driscoll, and then we'll do some further work in the data collection. That was something you would ask for earlier after the SPED report. So, does that
Can I
make
make a
sense?
suggestion for the board workshop? I don't think TC is gonna be a total board workshop.
No, I think
That's what
it was.
we were thinking of
Fine,
having a
professional
workshop that
Ross
covered different
Green,
things, yes.
Yeah.
Like a
Could be
professional
development,
learning workshop.
Yeah,
Yes,
yeah, that's
exactly.
what we talked about, and not just one piece of it.
Sure.
So if you have, you know,
And then
2
looking at
hours,
the,
30 minutes.
the technology 5-year lease model, which is great, I'm not saying it's not working,
Yep.
but at what point do we question
Sure.
the assumptions and make sure that that's the best approach?
And the other thing, the alternative high school, there's money here in the budget, right?
yes.
I think we should have a gross number, whatever the total is for all that's in there for that. And the point should be made that that is really a placeholder at this point in time until the board, until we do our presentation, the board.
Well, we
meets.
also talked yesterday, since it's gonna be 7 to 12, that
for next year, it's sitting, right now it's sitting in the high school budget, in the future it'll have its
Yeah.
own section.
Yeah. But it should be just that it is a placeholder until it's approved, until
Right.
we've gotten to the
Yeah.
meeting.
We're hearing the presentation.
We're hearing the presentation
Next week.
next week, right?
Thursday,
Thursday.
you'll get the white paper tomorrow, maybe
On
even.
time.
It is
Watch
on.
that. We told her to
Try.
Yeah. Check it out. I
It was
know.
very clear, that's it for me.
Okay, Debbie?
Go ahead, Gavin.
Oh, wait, you want one more thing?
Sure.
Since you asked. We are, I'm just teasing you. We're up 22 students since October 1. Despite what our elementary principal suggested, it's not actually at Miller, Driscoll, and Cider Mill. We're +1 in each of those schools, but we're up 6 at Middlebrook, and the balance is at the high school. We're actually up 10 in our 12th graders.
But it's not that there were large numbers of kids
Yeah.
enrolled, the problem is some
Yeah.
kids left.
Yeah,
Right,
it's just the
forget
net,
that.
net,
Right.
yeah,
Oh,
it's
okay.
net, net. So they do
Okay.
have, they have new
You
kids
have to
coming
do
in, but
that.
they have,
Okay,
they have
got
kids
it.
leaving as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that was.
Well, those are the
okay.
ages that parents of that age group would be transferable, moving in and out, would be more relocatable and more mobile in their careers and their jobs.
Yeah,
You know,
this
In
year's
the
enrollment mystery is Wilton High School.
I mean, it's-
Why do you
yeah,
move
no, it
it?
is. It happens.
Ends January.
Children get older, you're less
Yeah.
mobile,
Well,
you're not moving
Because
around so
maybe
much.
it's not, let's not,
Stabilize
okay,
your
meeting is
business.
adjourned.
Yes.
It's not like
Yes.
it's something like